Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for another Facebook Live. Look forward to visiting with you today, answering your questions. We let everybody know about this Facebook, so we've got a ton of questions that have come in beforehand. And I hope while you're watching here right now, send in your questions live so I can respond to them. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. We're going to focus primarily on our budget, getting a balanced budget with reforms and the status on our negotiations. You know, the bottom line is we've been trying to negotiate to get a balanced budget in Illinois for the last 18 months. It's ridiculous we haven't got it done. And here's a simple fact. You can't get a deal, you can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. That's just the fact. You can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. Speaker Madigan said a year ago that what he wanted to do was raise our income tax back up to at least 5% and go up from there. He's stopped talking about that, and now what he's pushing is just to do a stopgap, temporary, incomplete budget. And that's all he wants, with no reforms. And that would be a tragedy. That would be a failure. That will cause a crisis later and a bigger tax hike later, and it will force a tax hike without reforms down the road. That would be a huge mistake. We need a balanced budget now with reforms now. We need reforms to grow more jobs. We need reforms to bring down our property tax burden. They're the highest in America. We need reforms to properly fund our schools. We're the worst state for funding schools in America. And we need to change our government structure so it's more responsive to our citizens by having term limits on elected officials. More jobs, lower property taxes, better schools, and term limits on elected officials. These are the reforms we need. And if Speaker Madigan refuses to negotiate in good faith on these reforms, as he has for the last 18 months, then I'm going to insist, no matter what, I'll insist that if we're going to do a stopgap, like the Speaker is pushing, that we have at least two good reforms. One, term limits, the other, property tax freeze. Simple, bipartisan, very popular, very doable. We can get that done. So with that, let me give you an update on the status of the discussions, and I'll go through some of the questions. As I think most of you know, we did a stopgap agreement last June to get us through the election, because President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan said they didn't want to take any tough votes before the election. They wanted to wait until after. So we did that. We did a stopgap spending plan. It was temporary, didn't solve our problems, but it got us through the election. Immediately after the election, I said to the leaders, let's meet every day, and I'll do it here in Springfield, or we'll do it up in Chicago, whatever works. Let's meet every day to negotiate a balanced budget with reforms. The Speaker refused to tell us his schedule. He skipped the first meeting or two, and he won't even agree to meet every day, and he won't tell us his schedule so we can schedule around his priorities. It's unfortunate, but we've got to push forward and stay strong in the process. We need a balanced budget now, and we need reforms. Now let's go through some of the questions that you've got until we get into the specifics of the process. So Jim McGovern has sent in a question. He says, how is it that we don't have a budget and we're broke and can't pay most vendors, yet the state is still collecting revenue every day? Shouldn't the state have a ton of money that was brought in and not paid out? Well, Jim, it's a very good question, and the answer is yes. Tax revenue is coming in. Actually, we collect a lot of tax revenue, but we've been having deficit spending. We've been spending more than we bring in for decades. That's the reason we have the most debt of any state other than California. That's the reason we already have some of the highest taxes in America, and we've been deficit spending in a cycle of deficit spending, accounting gimmicks, borrowing, and then taxing. And that cycle, deficit spending, accounting gimmicks, borrowing, and taxing, that's been going on for decades. And it's the reason we don't have enough money to pay our bills. And we're the only state in America that I know of that just doesn't pay its bills. We either don't pay bills, we don't pay our pensions, what we do is use accounting gimmicks to cover up the deficits. And you know, the simple fact is, our Constitution requires us to have balanced budgets, but we've ignored our constitutional requirement. We always have out of balance budgets, and it's crushing our taxpayers, it's crushing our job creators and forcing them to leave the state. It's the reason we need reforms. Even if we just paid out bills that are coming in today, we're at deficit because we've got so many unpaid bills that's so large that we've got red ink flowing every day. We've got to change the system, change the structure. Get more jobs and more economic growth to get more revenue so we can pay down our bills and have a balanced budget for the long term. We'll get there, Jim. It's taken too long, but we'll stay persistent and get it done. Now, another question. This is from Jim Godfrey. Jim asks, how is it that lawmakers get to be released for the holidays while we have no budget? Seems to me we should be working daily on just that. Jim Godfrey, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm here in Springfield working. I wish the General Assembly was in session meeting to negotiate a balanced budget. You know what is even more outrageous than the fact that they're not negotiating with us in good faith on a budget is last week some Democratic lawmakers, supported by Speaker Madigan, filed a lawsuit so that their pay, legislators' pay, would be treated as a priority and put at the top of the unpaid bill pile. So they get paid now, even though we don't have a budget and we're having massive deficits, and they're not here negotiating a balanced budget, they still want to be paid first. This is wrong. This shows how broken the system is. Frankly, this shows why we need term limits so badly. But I've called on the Democratic lawmakers last week, drop the lawsuit. That is not the right thing to do. The people of Illinois should not be paying legislators' pay first when we don't have a balanced budget, when some of our human services agencies aren't getting paid. This is not the right thing. Drop the lawsuit. Let's get a balanced budget with reforms. Now, Jim, I'm requesting that we meet every day with the lawmakers, Speaker Madigan, President Cullerton. Right, I asked that we negotiate reforms. Speaker said, well, reforms are not, fine, but what we need to do is talk about the budget with appropriations and new tax revenue. I said, okay, let's talk about that in the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, they showed up and said, well, we're not ready to talk about the appropriations. We need more time. We need to wait. And now we're waiting. It's been almost a week since the Democrats said they needed to wait and they needed more time, and every day matters. My sense is they're delaying, they're stalling, they're using tactics to get into January, February, and create a crisis, meltdown of our human services and our important social service agencies, and then try to force a stopgap plan or a tax hike with no reforms. That would be a tragic failure and a mistake. They should be here negotiating a balanced budget with reforms. All right, so next question. I guess a bunch of folks have asked, because there's no one name. This one must have had a bunch. Several folks have asked about funding for higher education and where that stands. All right, this is a huge issue. I am a big advocate for all education. It's the most important thing we do with our tax dollars is fund education. It's the future for our young people of the state of Illinois. I personally have been for years a major donor over at the U of I and a big advocate for higher education quality. Our community colleges especially, and our four-year institutions of higher learning. Simple fact is we have not been funding our universities properly in Illinois for years, just like we haven't been funding our K-12 schools properly for years. We have some of the highest tuition for in-state students as well as out-of-state students of any state university system in the country. And many of our high school graduates don't stay in-state. They go out to places like Mizzou or the University of Iowa or other places where they get more value because we haven't been supporting our university system. We also have a very costly bureaucracy in our university system. The state puts a lot of mandates on our university system, so their procurement process is very expensive. It costs tens of millions of dollars of excess spending that could go into the classroom with the teachers and could go to scholarships for our low-income kids, but instead it goes into a bloated, wasteful procurement system. We should reform procurement. Same thing with our pension system. Our university system is in our very expensive, unaffordable pension system. If we got pension reform, we could save hundreds of millions of dollars over time for our universities, and they could put that into supporting tuition reductions, scholarships for low-income kids, and better pay for our teachers and our professors. We need to change our system so our universities are more affordable, and we properly support them from the state through balanced budgets with economic growth and reform. This is what we're fighting for every day, and if we stay persistent, we'll get it done. Our universities, critically important, along with K-12 schools and early childhood education as well. Next question. I don't know if I'll pronounce this right. Mari Aria Bird asks, why are we bankrupt? I'm proud to be from this state, but I don't see a future here. I'm young, I plan on having a family someday, but I don't think it can happen here. Well, Mari, that's a sad statement and it's a sad question, but you know what? That sentiment that you express, I strongly, personally agree with, and it's the reason I ran for governor. You know, I was born in Illinois, raised our 6 kids here, Diane and I. We've built businesses here. This is home. We love Illinois. We love our home. And I decided to run for governor because I couldn't stand to see what was happening to us. You know, people have your frustration with the lack of a bright future. People in Illinois have been seeing this for decades. That's the reason that Illinois is the leading state in America for out-migration. People leaving here. Illinois and New Jersey are the two states where people leave the most from. It's because our people are frustrated. They don't see a good future for themselves. They're leaving to follow jobs. They're leaving to follow a lower cost of living and a better quality of life with lower taxes. They're going other places. This is what we've got to change. And this is the reason I ran for governor. And I'm a volunteer. I'm doing this because I love Illinois. I'm not taking any compensation. I don't want a pension. I don't need any benefits. What I want is a better future for your children, my children, all of our children, and our grandchildren, so they can have a better future in Illinois. That's what we're fighting for every day. That's why our reforms are so important. We need more jobs, good paying jobs in Illinois. We need to bring down our property tax burden. It's crushing our families here. We need to invest more in our schools, especially our low income or our rural schools. They need more support. And we got to change the culture in our government so it's working for you and all the people of the state by getting term limits on elected officials. Nothing will change the culture in our government and make it more about public service faster than term limits. That's what we're fighting for every day. Next question. This is from Eric James Stewart. He says, how can we help you in your efforts? Well, Eric, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for that. And the simple answer is spread the word to your friends, your neighbors, everybody you come in contact with. Go on and forward some of the links to our social media efforts. We've got to spread the word about the reforms that we're making. The more we spread the message, the more we can create pressure for change in the General Assembly to get good things done. We've got to get the word out. And you know, here's a simple fact. We've got to create pressure for Speaker Madigan to want to get an agreement. It's the simple fact, can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. And the Speaker's been clear. He wants to do a big tax hike, and until he's ready to force that, he wants stopgap spending that's temporary, that's incomplete, that doesn't really fix the problem, and continue this deficit spending that we've been having in Illinois for more than 30 years. We've got to change direction. And Eric, the key, and what you can do, and your friends, family, neighbors, spread the word. Social media, phone calls, in meetings you go to, call into your local radio station, write a letter to the editor of your local paper. Get the message out. We need reforms to change the direction of the state. We need truly balanced budgets, and we need reforms to grow jobs, lower property taxes, improve our schools and fund them properly, and get term limits on elected officials. If we stay strong and get the message out, we're going to get this done. The good news is many members in the Democratic caucus in the General Assembly know that what we're asking for is right, it's good, and it's bipartisan. We got to have them create pressure on Speaker Madigan to change. Even the Speaker's daughter, Attorney General Lisa Madigan, a leading Democrat, has said one of our most important reforms around workers' comp, she agrees with the fundamental nature of the change that we're recommending. These changes are bipartisan. We got to get them done. Next question. This comes from Donald Harrington. Donald Harrington asks, some of you are asking why, apparently it's more than Donald, but he's one of the main guys, asking why I won't present a budget plan. Okay, so the reality is I presented a balanced budget my first month in office in January of 2015. It was balanced, it had some cuts, and it did have pension reform in it, and we were going to require a small short-term bridge to implement the pension reform, but in the scheme of the challenges we're facing, it was very doable. My recommendation for a balanced budget was ignored by the General Assembly, and they went on in the spring of 2015 and passed a wildly out of balance budget by more than $5 billion budget that I had to veto because there was no way to pay for it. It wasn't even close to being balanced. And then this past January, again in my budget address, I recommended possibly one of two paths to a balanced budget. I said the first path to a balanced budget is that we work together through our working groups, get bipartisan agreement on cuts, potentially new revenues and reforms, and we do that on a bipartisan basis, and the working groups produced that result last spring. Or if we don't want to do that, give me the executive authority, General Assembly, grant me the authority to make the necessary cuts and expenses to balance the budget. The General Assembly, they've repeatedly said no. We won't give the executive authority to make the cuts, and we won't follow up on the working group recommendations on getting a balanced budget with reforms. So that's the reason we're stuck. And again, you can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. We've got to ask the Speaker and President Cullerton, please commit to getting an agreement. Let's get bipartisan reforms, good things done for the people of Illinois. Next question, Brian Shop, or Shopey. What is the incentive for the residents and businesses to stay in this state? That's the essential question, Brian. That's the reason I ran for governor, and that's what we're fighting for. Illinois is such a wonderful place. I love Illinois. This is home. This is a great place. We've got the best people, hardest working people in America. We've got the best location of any state in America. We've got the best agriculture of any state in America. We've got some of the best infrastructure, some of the best universities of any state in America. We should be thriving. We should be kicking tails. And instead, we have the highest property taxes in America. We have massive deficit spending and some of the highest debt of any state in America. We have the 5th highest property tax burden, and we're bleeding out jobs, especially manufacturing jobs, at a very high rate. And we've got massive cronyism and patronage and conflicts of interest in our state government. Our government, our state government, is failing the people of Illinois, and that's what we've got to change. If we change that very quickly, we'll have residents who want to stay, we'll have residents who want to move from other states, who want to move to Illinois, and we'll have businesses who want to come. I've talked to dozens of businesses who would like to come to Illinois that I'm trying to recruit to come here, but they've said, Governor, show that long-term taxpayers have a voice in Illinois, show that you'll be financially responsible, that special interest groups won't keep forcing deficit spending, and show that you've got a regulatory burden that will allow businesses and job creators to compete. And you say, the job creators have said, Governor, if you can show that, we'll come. We'd love to come to Illinois and hire the great people there and build businesses in your great state. We want to come, but you've got to show change and direction because you've been going down a road that's very hostile to job creators for a long time. That's what we're fighting for, and together we can get it done. Some more questions have come in here while we're speaking. Here, Alexander Lavaney, looks like, from Chicago, asks, is there anything you plan to do at the state level to intervene and or stop our real estate taxes from becoming more burdensome? Well, Alexander, it's a great question. Our property taxes in Illinois are the highest in America. Us, we're basically tied with New Jersey for the highest taxes, and also tied for the most out-migration of people leaving, not a coincidence. And our reforms are about bringing down our property taxes. What do we need to do to get it done? We need to put on a property tax freeze, meaning local governments, local districts can't raise property taxes unless they get a voter referendum approving the tax hike. That will change and give you and the residents of Illinois more voice, more power in controlling the pace of property tax increases. That's one important step. The other thing we've got to do is reduce the unfunded mandates, the rules, the regulations, the restrictions being put on local governments and local schools from the state. We've got unbelievable red tape and restrictions and mandates forcing high spending with no way to pay for it. And what we should do is get Springfield out of the local government's management, let each community decide for itself how it wants to handle its cost structure and run its government its own way. If we do that, each local government and each school district can run its own system, its own way, with the local resident support and bring down the costs over time. That's the key. Local control of the costs of government and getting rid of the unfunded mandates and the layers of government bureaucracy that Springfield forces on our local communities will bring down our property taxes, bring down the cost of living for our working families, and bring down the cost of locating here for job creators that build the good paying jobs that we need more of in the state of Illinois. Another question from Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan Opadora, it looks like. Let's see. Why don't you want a stopgap budget? Well, Matt, that's a good question. So we reluctantly agreed to a stopgap budget last June as a way to get through the election at the request of President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan. Matt, the reason stopgap budgets really aren't good is that they're incomplete, they're temporary, and they have spending going on that has no way to pay for it. And all that will do is eventually, it cause a crisis. Basically, stopgap budgets kick the can, and it will cause a crisis later, and it will result in an even bigger tax hike down the road. We should face reality, get a balanced budget right now, the sooner the better, and get reforms to grow the economy and create more good-paying jobs. And a stopgap budget doesn't do that. It doesn't get any reforms. It doesn't fix the problem. A stopgap is a kick-the-can strategy. We've been kicking the can in Illinois, not paying our pensions, not paying our bills for decades, and it's created the mess that we're in. And the simple fact is, we'll never have balanced budgets unless our pace of economic growth is as fast or faster than our pace of government spending growth. And we've been flat economic growth on jobs for years. Meanwhile, our government spending has been on a rocket ship. That, by definition, always results in unbalanced budgets, deficit spending for the long term, and we've got to change that. And raising tax rates won't solve that problem. It just temporarily might balance a budget for a short period, like we've done occasionally over the last 40 years. But in the end, if economic growth is flat and government spending is going on a rocket ship, raising tax rates just never catch up, and you chase your tail down. That's why we need reforms along with a truly balanced budget. Let's see. Question from Andrew Mertzenich. Sorry, Andrew, I'm not getting your pronunciation right for your last name. How you fund things without the property tax? Well, this is, Andrew, this is an important issue. Obviously, we need to have property taxes to fund our schools, to fund key local government, our police and fire and key agencies. Property taxes are an important part of a functioning government. But in Illinois, we have the highest property taxes in America. We have some of the worst unfunded mandates from our state government of anywhere in America. And we have more units of local government. We have more bureaus and districts and entities, townships, et cetera. Entities that many should exist, but some of them probably are not necessary. We have 2,000 more units of government than the next state after us. Those 2,000 units add extra cost and extra layers of bureaucracy. We could shrink that down and then put that money we save into our schools and into our human services. And that's what we're fighting for. Local control. Folks who want to keep all their levels of government should keep them. But those residents, those communities that would like to shrink the number of bureaucracies, the number of layers of government they have, they should be allowed to do that. Springfield should not be mandating, requiring that we have so many units of government. That's one of the biggest things we're fighting for. And if we change that, we can bring down our property tax burden without reducing the quality or amount of our government services, and we can free up the resources to put in our schools. We can become more competitive to grow more jobs. That's the kind of reform we really need. Another question from Michael Shuck. Michael asks, what's your plan for small business? All right, Michael, this is a great question. You know, small businesses are the backbone of Illinois' economy, the backbone of the American economy. 2/3 of all new jobs created are created by small businesses. Prior to my running for office and becoming a public servant to work for you directly, I was a venture capitalist for 32 years. I helped start and grow hundreds of small businesses. And many of them failed. Starting a small business is hard. But many, many succeeded on a massive scale. I was very proud of our success. And some of those companies were in Illinois, and there's all over the United States. And the money we invested in the small businesses were teachers' pension money. I was proud to work for teachers in Illinois and across America for 32 years, building businesses, having the business success make money for teachers so they could have a better retirement and we could save taxpayer money. Very proud of that track record. Now here as governor, core part of our plan, core part of what we're fighting for in reforms is to make Illinois more attractive, more competitive for small businesses. We've got to grow and help small businesses and enhance their competitiveness. To do that, we need to reduce the regulatory burden on our businesses, reduce the red tape, cut the red tape, bring down the property tax burden, and free up our small businesses to compete and thrive. One of the biggest changes we need to make to help small business is our workers' comp costs, the insurance to help injured workers. We need to protect our injured workers, make sure they get good health care, but we got to make sure there's not fraud, there's not abuse, there's not claims for work injuries that really didn't happen in work. They happened outside of the workplace. That's not fair to the hardworking employees, and that's not fair to the small businesses and the job creators. Even Democratic leader, Attorney General Lisa Madigan has said she agrees that we need causation. We need to change workers' comp and have causation in it to have it be affordable and competitive to grow jobs in Illinois. That's one of the many things we're fighting for to help small businesses grow here. Let's see. Boy, a lot of questions coming in. This is good. Ross Edwards asks, with a property tax freeze, where does education money come from? Okay, great question, Ross. Short answer, money for more spending in education can come from two places. One, more money from the state, because the state of Illinois is the worst state government in America for contributing the fair share to schools. We want to increase state support from schools. The second place is going to come from is by cutting the bureaucracy, the layers of government, the wasteful spending inside government, and the savings that come from that can go into our schools. That's the two sources. Cut the bureaucracy and wasteful spending and increase state support. That way we can afford to freeze our property taxes and reduce the property tax burden over time and still put more money in our schools, which is where the top priority for taxpayer money should go. Great question, Ross. Brian Eckstein asks, how will you draw in more residents to the state? Well, that's a core of everything we're fighting for. We need to attract more residents, more hardworking families, more job creators to the state of Illinois. To do that, we need to reduce the regulatory burden and the red tape. We need to bring down our property tax burden. We need to reduce the bureaucracy and put the money in our schools so we have the best education system in America. And we need a responsive government system that works for the people by getting term limits on elected officials. Term limits are a great way to make government more responsive, get people in government who are there for the right reasons, not for a pension, not for big pay, not to get entrenched with special interest money, but just there to be public servants, make good decisions for the people of Illinois, and then leave office. If we change that, more people will come, we'll bring more residents, we'll bring more jobs and job creators, and Illinois will have a very bright future. Mike Zenz, looks like, Mike Zenz asks, when do term limits go into effect? Mike, that's a great question. So what we're recommending in our bill for term limits is that all statewide elected officials could stay in any one office at the most 8 years, no longer than 8 years. And I've said, I've committed, I will not stay in as governor more than 8 years. 2 terms, that's a long time. That's just what George Washington did when he founded America. Term limits on the governor, the lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, comptroller should be 8 years. For the General Assembly, we've recommended that 10 years be the limit. That's a long time. That's plenty of time to be a member of the General Assembly, to be a lawmaker. And for those public officials who would like to stay in elected office, you can always run for another office. But the key is don't stay entrenched in any one office too long. If we can have the General Assembly pass term limits through the General Assembly and put it on the ballot so it can be a voter referendum, so you can decide, you can vote it up or down in the 2018 election, then the clock will start ticking and we'll have 10 years for General Assembly members starting in 2018. 2018 is the next time that we can get term limits on the ballot in a statewide general election, so you can vote up or down term limits. That's why we're fighting so hard. You should be able to decide. If you don't want term limits, you can vote no, but you should have a voice. And if you want term limits, you should be able to vote yes to get it done one way or another. Okay? And no more questions? We done? Okay. Well, we still got a bunch of questions flying in, but I'm told we're running out of time. Appreciate the visit with you today. Thank you so much for all the great questions. We'll try to respond to some of them too, just online, and so we can keep the dialogue going. Thank you for your concern for the future of our state. It's an honor, privilege for me and my wife Diana to work for you. We look forward to visiting with you again and doing more Facebook Live updates. Again, help us spread the word. We need a balanced budget with reforms, and let's put the pressure there. Let's make sure that everybody in the General Assembly wants to get an agreement. Can't get an agreement unless both sides want to agree. Let's agree to get reforms. Let's get a balanced budget, and we'll have a better future for our children and our grandchildren. Thanks, everybody. Take care.